I found out about the cruise the way I always found things out in this family, through an offhand comment, a casual mention that wasn't meant for me, said like I wasn't even there. Mom was stirring the marinara, wooden spoon clicking against the pot, when she said, "Eric's gonna need a nice pair of boat shoes, nothing too flashy, just something decent for the dinners." I remember standing at the sink with a dripping glass in my hand, staring at the window like maybe if I stayed quiet, the moment would evaporate. But of course, it didn't. Dad grunted something about smart casual, and Mom agreed, then added, "You know how those cruise lines are. Dress codes and all that." They chuckled together. My parents. Chuckling. Planning. Coordinating. For him. No one turned around. No one said, "Hey Dan, we were thinking maybe you'd want to come too," or even, "We know it's last minute." Nothing. Not a single goddamn thing. I asked, half joking, half hopeful, "What cruise?" And my mother gave me that look she always gave when I asked something inconvenient. Like I just farted in church. "Oh, you didn't know," she said, blinking like I'd tripped some invisible landmine. "We got Eric that trip he wanted. The Caribbean one. You know he's been talking about it since college." She wiped her hands on a dish towel and added, almost as an afterthought, "We were gonna tell you. Just didn't get around to it. Didn't get around to it." That's how she said it. Like breaking news of a tropical vacation to her other son, her other child, was something that could be tossed around between laundry loads and grocery runs. I nodded slowly, glass still dripping in my hand, a small puddle growing at my feet. "Oh, that's nice," I said, my voice so flat it felt like it wasn't mine. "How long's the cruise?" My dad turned around then, finally looked at me for the first time that evening. 10 days. They leave next Saturday. We got the ticket last month, big sale." He smiled like it was a job well done. A financial victory. Mission accomplished. It took everything in me not to ask the obvious. But I asked anyway. "I thought you said money was tight?" The silence that followed could have frozen the room. Mom went back to stirring like she hadn't heard me, and Dad muttered, "It was. We made some adjustments." Adjustments. That's what I was, an adjustment. An expendable line item on their family budget. What really got me wasn't the money. Not entirely. It was the fact that 2 weeks before, when my car's transmission finally shit the bed and I asked them, begged them for a little help, they gave me the same line they always did. "We're really strapped this month. We're dipping into retirement. It's just not the right time." But for Eric? For Golden Boy Eric? The timing was always perfect. I've never screamed at my parents. Never raised my voice. Not even once. I was the calm one, the good son, the one who never broke things or talked back or disappointed. I paid my way through trade school. I worked 2 jobs for 4 years while Eric dropped out of college 3 times and still somehow got a bigger Christmas stocking. I gave them space when they needed it. I called every Sunday. I remembered birthdays. I even called my mother after her hysterectomy when Eric didn't even show up at the hospital. And now they were sending him to the Caribbean while I was riding the bus to work, clutching my lunch in a plastic grocery bag like some goddamn orphan from a Charles Dickens novel. I didn't say anything else that night. I washed the dishes. I wiped down the counter. I even took out the trash. I said good night like everything was normal. But something shifted in me, something that felt irreversible. It was like realizing your house was built on sand and had already started sinking years ago, but you were the last one to notice. I didn't sleep. I lay there staring at the ceiling fan, listening to it click with every slow rotation, and I thought, how many other times have they chosen him? The answer, if I'm being honest, was countless. Birthdays. Christmases. Even little things like who got the front seat or the last scoop of ice cream. Always Eric. Always without hesitation. It had been so constant, so ingrained, that I stopped keeping score a long time ago. But now I was tired. Not the kind of tired that a good night's sleep fixes. This was the kind of tired that gets in your bones, that makes your skin feel like a coat you don't want to wear anymore. I thought about the apartment I was barely affording, the busted car in the parking lot, the boss who kept threatening to cut hours, and the fact that I had no one waiting for me when I got home, just silence and bills and old takeout boxes. And then I thought about the fact that they were going to be sipping cocktails on a sun deck while I rode the city bus with a guy who probably pees himself once a week. I got up just before sunrise. Quietly. No stomping. No theatrics. Just me and the hum of the fridge. I opened the closet and pulled down the old duffel I used when I moved out 15 years ago. I unzipped it, wide and empty, like it had been waiting. I started folding clothes, not a lot, just enough. A few shirts, a couple pairs of jeans, my tools, the notebook I used for quotes and sketches. I grabbed the passport I'd never used. And I sat on the edge of the bed, bag packed, staring at the front door like it was some portal to a different life. I didn't leave that morning. But I didn't unpack either. Not yet. That was the moment I realized I could. That staying wasn't required. That I owed no one anything. And it scared me how free that felt. They would be leaving next Saturday. But they had no idea that I would be too. Let me ask you something. Have you ever realized, way too late, that your family never actually saw you? Not who you really are, just who they needed you to be. Because I swear to God, I didn't see it until I was nearly 40, standing in my bedroom with a packed bag and nothing to say. It was like waking up in a movie you didn't remember agreeing to star in. You look around, recognize the actors, but the script? The script is someone else's. And for the first time in your life, you start asking yourself, when the hell did I stop existing in this house? It didn't start with the cruise, of course. That was just the blow that finally knocked the wind out of me. The rest, well, it's a slow grind. 1,000 paper cuts over decades, and you don't even know you're bleeding out until one day you look down and wonder how the hell you're still standing. I remember birthdays most of all. Not because they were special, but because they weren't. Every year since I could remember, I got the practical gift, socks, a winter coat, a gift card to a place I never went. Meanwhile, Eric got things that sparkled, things with boxes and batteries and wrapping paper that sang when you touched it. I told myself it didn't matter. I was the older one, the strong one, the one who didn't need to be made a fuss over. But there was this one year, I was 16, when I'd asked for a guitar. Not a fancy one, just something cheap I could mess around on. I'd circled the ad in the catalog, even left it open on the kitchen table like some desperate sitcom kid. And on my birthday, they handed me a sweater. Size large. I wore medium. The tag was still on it from the clearance rack at some department store that smelled like old perfume and regrets. I smiled and thanked them anyway. 2 months later, Eric got a drum kit. Full set. Cymbals. Stool. The works. He played it 3 times before deciding he was more into skateboarding. The drums went to the basement, never touched again. There's this narrative in families like mine, especially the ones that don't scream or throw punches, where everything looks fine from the outside. You learn not to question it, because the moment you do, you become the problem. If you're quiet, you're reliable. If you're upset, you're dramatic. If you disappear, you're selfish. And if you stay, you're strong, but only as long as you don't complain. I never complained. Not once. I was 8 when Eric was born. My mother used to tell me I was her big helper. That I was so mature, such a blessing. I wiped his nose, tied his shoes, even walked him to his first day of school while she stayed home to catch up on rest. Every time I looked for her attention, it slipped through my fingers like steam. But Eric? He could stub his toe, and she'd make it a goddamn national holiday. They said I was smart, but Eric was special. That word haunted me. Special. It was like a permission slip for him to be a disaster. Bad grades? He was going through a phase. Caught with weed? He needs a little space. Flunked out of community college for the 2nd time? He's finding himself. I could have discovered a cure for cancer, and they'd ask if I remembered to feed the dog. Dad wasn't much better. He was the strong, silent type, the kind of man who only cried when his favorite team lost the Super Bowl and thought emotions were a weakness passed down from the mother's side. He taught me how to mow the lawn, change a tire, and never cry in public. He was a man of tasks, not affection. The most praise I ever got from him was, "That'll do," and the closest we came to bonding was grunting at each other during halftime. The thing is, it wasn't even that I wanted more stuff or even more attention. I just wanted to be seen, not through the lens of obligation, not as the fallback kid, not as the one they didn't have to worry about. I wanted them to ask how I was doing and mean it. I wanted one single moment where I felt like they chose me, but that moment never came. Instead, I became the shadow that kept things moving, the one who filled the silences, paid the bills, made the plans, and never made a scene. And yeah, I told myself stories to survive it. I told myself I was the strong one, the dependable one, the grown-up in a house of children. But you live enough years with that weight, and eventually, your spine starts to bend. Last night, after I packed the duffel, I went looking for my old sketchbooks, the ones I used to draw in before life got too loud. They were buried deep in my closet behind coats that didn't fit and shoes with cracked soles. And behind those sketchbooks, I found a box. I didn't remember putting it there, but the handwriting was mine. A dozen envelopes. Maybe more. All addressed to my parents. None of them mailed. They were letters, unsent, unfinished, angry, apologetic, confused. Some written in high school, others in college. One just after my first breakup. Another when I didn't get into the apprenticeship I wanted. Pages of words I never said out loud. Why didn't you come to my game? Why do you only hug him? Do you even see me anymore? Some were half finished. Others had tear stains, dried and wrinkled into the paper. I sat on the floor with those letters for hours, flipping through years of pain I'd buried like I was trying to convince myself it hadn't been real. But it was. Every word, every sentence. All the things I didn't say because I thought they wouldn't listen, or worse, that they'd pretend they didn't understand. And now I wonder if maybe they did understand. Maybe they saw everything and chose to ignore it. Maybe ignoring it was easier than fixing it. Maybe I became too convenient to care about. I didn't cry. Not right then. I just sat there, surrounded by paper ghosts, wondering what kind of son writes his parents letters he never plans to send. Next Saturday, they'd be off on their cruise. Palm trees. Buffets. Open bars. And I'd be gone, too. But not on vacation. Not even close. The day after I found the box of letters, I got up before sunrise and acted like everything was fine, which, to be fair, was what I'd been doing for most of my life. I brushed my teeth, ironed my shirt, ate the same bland toast with the same store-brand butter, and smiled at my neighbor on the stairs like I wasn't actively planning to vanish from my own life. Faking normal had become second nature, the kind of thing you do so often you start believing your own bullshit. It's a sick kind of muscle memory, one you don't even realize is working until it finally breaks. When I got to work, Gary from the warehouse asked how my weekend was, and I said, "Not bad," even though my whole body was vibrating with that itchy, nauseating kind of anger that sits just under your skin. The kind that makes you want to scream into your steering wheel or punch drywall like some sad cliche of masculinity. But I didn't scream. I didn't punch. I just smiled, nodded, signed the delivery slip, and kept moving. I was always moving. Moving helped. The truth was, I'd started plotting my exit long before the cruise. The cruise just gave me the final push, the final slap in the face that said, "You don't belong here." But the seed was planted a year ago, the night Emma left. We were together for 3 years. Lived in a one-bedroom apartment with a leaky faucet and a bed that squeaked if you so much as breathed wrong. She loved that stupid bed. Said it had character. I used to laugh and say, "You have a weird definition of charm," and she'd smile and kiss my cheek like it was the best joke she'd ever heard. I hadn't made her laugh in months before she left. She told me I was like trying to hug fog. That I was there, physically, but never emotionally. She said she was tired of talking to someone who was always 1 foot out the door. You say everything's fine, she told me, sitting cross-legged on the floor with her coat already on, but it never is it? It's just easier for you to pretend nothing's wrong than admit you need anything. She looked at me like she was already gone, and I just sat there, staring at my own hands like maybe I'd find the right words written on my palms. The worst part? I didn't stop her. I wanted to. I wanted to stand up, grab her hand, say something that mattered. But I couldn't. I didn't know how. I'd spent so many years stuffing everything down that I didn't have the vocabulary for vulnerability. So she left. Quietly. And I told everyone we broke up mutually, like it was some business deal that ended politely. Looking back, I don't blame her. I wouldn't have stayed either. Since then, every part of my life had become a routine. Wake up. Go to work. Eat frozen meals in front of a TV I barely watched. Call my parents once a week. Hear about Eric's latest drama. Nod. Say, wow, that's crazy. Hang up. Go to bed. Repeat. I was a ghost living in his own skin. But something about packing that bag made it all feel real. I wasn't just daydreaming about leaving. I was leaving. For good. No drama. No big speeches. Just silence. A clean break. All week, I played the part. I answered texts. I smiled at coworkers. I even asked Mom about the cruise like I gave a damn. She told me about the buffet options and the deck parties and how Eric was so excited, and I smiled and said, "That sounds amazing," while wondering if I'd still be in the state by the time they reached the first port. The day before they left, I went back to my old apartment, the one I used to share with Emma. The landlord never fixed anything, but the front step still creaked the same way it did the night she kissed me for the first time. I stood there a long time, just breathing in the cold air and wondering what she'd say if she saw me now. Maybe nothing. Maybe she'd just shake her head, say, "Too little, too late," and shut the door. Inside, the new tenant had painted over the chipped walls, but the dent in the bedroom door was still there, from when I accidentally slammed it too hard after another fight we never really resolved. I don't know why I went there. Maybe to remind myself that I could still feel something. Maybe just to say goodbye to the version of me that lived there. The guy who thought silence was safety. That night, back home, I sat at the kitchen table and pulled out a piece of paper. Just one. I didn't know what I wanted to say, not really. But the words came anyway, slow and clumsy like someone learning how to walk. I wrote about the cruise, about the years of being overlooked, about the birthdays and the thankless chores and the endless swallowing of anger. I didn't sign my name. I didn't need to. The letter wasn't a cry for help. It wasn't even a goodbye. It was just the truth, naked and brutal and long overdue. I folded it once, slid it into an envelope, and left it on the kitchen counter. Right between the stack of mail and the grocery list Mom kept taped to the fridge. They wouldn't find it until after they were gone. That was the plan. The next morning, before the sun was even up, I locked the front door behind me, got in the car, and drove. No destination. No plan. Just me, the highway, and a letter they wouldn't understand even if they tried. The funny thing about disappearing is how easy it is when no one's really looking for you to begin with. I thought, maybe in the back of my mind, that someone would notice right away. Maybe Dad would check in when he didn't get my Sunday call, or Mom would notice the silence and feel that maternal gut instinct everyone's always talking about. But by the time I hit the Colorado state line, radio static humming in and out as the mountains swallowed the signal, it had been 2 full days and no one had reached out. Not one missed call. Not a single goddamn text. The highways felt endless, like they stretched out into some kind of limbo where time moved slower and the sky hung heavier. It was the kind of road where even your thoughts echo back at you, bouncing off empty billboards and truck stop signs half-lit in the dusk. I wasn't running away exactly. I didn't have a destination or some dramatic goal like in the movies. I just drove. I drove because staying felt like a form of death, and leaving, even without a plan, at least gave me the illusion of forward motion. There's something terrifying and beautiful about the idea that no one knows where you are. That you could vanish between two exits on a nameless stretch of highway and the world would keep spinning without even the smallest pause. That kind of realization gets under your skin. You start questioning everything, who you are, who you've been, and what it even means to belong anywhere. The car hummed beneath me, that old rattle in the dashboard more familiar than most people I knew. I stopped in random towns where the gas was cheaper and the people didn't look twice at a man traveling alone. I ate microwaved burritos and drank gas station coffee that tasted like burnt regret, but I didn't care. For the first time in my life, I wasn't trying to be anything for anyone. I wasn't the good son, the dependable worker, the guy who showed up when no one else did. I was just a man with a tank full of gas and an empty chair beside him. I passed diners with glowing neon signs and thought about Emma again, how she used to say she wanted to do a road trip across the country, stopping at every weird roadside attraction, taking pictures with a Polaroid camera, eating pie in every state. I never said yes. I always said we didn't have time or money or that we'd do it later. But later has a way of dying quietly if you don't feed it, and by the time I was ready, she was already gone. At night, I'd sleep in cheap motels with peeling wallpaper and cigarette burns on the blankets, and in the quiet darkness of those rooms, I felt more peace than I had in my parents' house in years. There was no tension pressing into my chest, no subtle looks of disappointment, no comparisons. Just silence and my own breath and the ticking of a world that didn't care if I came or went. I drove through Kansas, flat and endless, like the sky had fallen and flattened everything beneath it. I saw a family at a rest stop, the dad wrangling two screaming kids while the mom looked at her phone like it held the last shred of her sanity, and for a brief moment, I envied them. Not the chaos or the noise, but the fact that someone would notice if they disappeared. Someone would miss them. By the time I reached New Mexico, I'd stopped checking my phone altogether. Part of me wanted to believe they were trying to contact me, that maybe there were missed calls I just hadn't seen. But when I finally looked 2.5 days into my self-imposed exile, there was one notification. It wasn't a missed call. It wasn't a "where are you?" or a "we're worried about you." It was a text from my mother. 7 words. "Did you take the garbage out before disappearing?" I stared at the screen for a long time, sitting in the parking lot of some rundown diner with a cracked open sign flickering in the window. That text hit harder than any slap in the face. It wasn't just the casual tone or the fact that she clearly knew I'd left and didn't seem to care enough to ask why. It was that even in my absence, I was still just a chore to her. A loose thread in her to-do list. I didn't respond. I didn't throw the phone or scream or cry. I just put it down, turned the ignition, and drove west again. The road was dark, and the wind howled outside the window like something alive, and I kept thinking about that text. 7 words. More than I got on most birthdays. There was an empty chair beside me, and I finally realized it had always been there, not just in the car, but at dinner tables, family gatherings, holidays. I was never really in the room. Just a placeholder. Just someone to fill the silence. And, for the first time, I started to feel free. Not happy, not fixed, but free. And that was something. The text sat, unread, for nearly a day before I opened it again, just to make sure I hadn't imagined how cold it was. 7 words that sounded more like a note left on the fridge than a mother reaching out to her missing son. There was no question mark. Just the assumption that I'd gotten up and left without warning, but would still be thoughtful enough to handle the trash. That message told me everything I needed to know. They knew I was gone. They just hadn't expected me to mean it. While I drove through Arizona's open spaces, dry and golden with dust clinging to the air like static, I pictured their faces when they realized I wasn't coming back. Mom, probably standing in the kitchen holding the envelope I left, squinting like it was written in code. Dad, maybe pacing the hallway, muttering that I was being dramatic. And Eric, God knows what Eric would do. Probably laugh it off or pretend to be concerned in that lazy, half-present way he always had when things didn't directly involve him. But I'll tell you what I didn't imagine. I didn't imagine grief. I didn't imagine tears. I didn't picture anyone collapsing into a chair, hand on their heart, whispering, "Where did we go wrong?" That kind of emotion belonged to families who noticed when someone went silent. Mine had been half listening for decades, nodding along to a script they wrote without my input. So when I fell off the radar, it wasn't a tragedy. It was an inconvenience. By the third day, the calls started, not to me, of course. I still had my phone off, buried deep in the passenger seat like it might bite me, but I had email notifications and a backup inbox I hadn't checked in years. That's where I saw the first sign of something resembling panic. A message from Dad that read, "Daniel, your mother is worried. Please call us." This isn't funny. No, are you okay? No, we love you. Just this isn't funny. Like my absence was a punchline they didn't understand. I parked that night in a rest stop outside of Sedona, too tired to find a motel and too wired to sleep anyway. That's when I started writing. Not letters this time, no performative goodbyes or desperate pleas for understanding. Just raw thoughts, spilled into a cheap spiral notebook I picked up at a gas station. The pages filled quickly. Not neatly. Not with structure. Just feelings, tangled and dark, things I had swallowed down so deeply they tasted like rust on the way out. I wrote about the Christmas when I was 13 and didn't get a single present because they forgot I already opened mine early, except I hadn't. I wrote about the way Eric would cry to get out of trouble and how it always worked, even when I took the blame. I wrote about my 25th birthday, when they took Eric to dinner and told me they were just trying to cheer him up after his breakup. I wasn't invited. I spent that night eating Chinese takeout alone, pretending to laugh at a sitcom that didn't deserve it. I wrote about the day Emma left and how I didn't call anyone. Not because I didn't want to, but because I knew no one would answer with anything more than tired pity or empty suggestions. She'll come back. Give it time. You're strong, Dan. No one ever said, that must hurt like hell. I'm here. I had become the reliable one, and reliable people don't fall apart. They carry the weight, smile under it, and keep everyone else comfortable. Writing those things down didn't fix anything, but it gave me space to breathe. It was like tearing open old wounds just to let them scab over properly. For the first time, I let myself feel every part of it: anger, sadness, betrayal, even the numb spots where I thought emotion used to live. Meanwhile, I imagined the chaos unfolding back home. I could picture Mom dialing Eric and snapping, "This is your fault somehow," while he sat on the couch with his feet up, trying to figure out why his vacation got ruined by my midlife rebellion. I imagined Dad staying quiet, stewing in some combination of confusion and masculine silence, convinced that if he didn't talk about it, it would sort itself out. And maybe part of me wanted them to squirm. Maybe a small, twisted corner of my soul needed them to feel something, anything resembling the confusion and loneliness I'd swallowed my whole life. I didn't want revenge exactly. I wanted recognition. Not the kind you give when someone dies, all too late and soaked in regret, but the kind you're supposed to give while they're still in front of you, still reachable, still hurting and human. Around midnight, I turned the phone back on, knowing it was a bad idea, like poking a wound just to see if it still bleeds. The screen lit up with missed calls: Mom, Dad, a few from numbers I didn't recognize. But the last one stopped me cold. Eric. 2 calls. No voicemails. Just the record of his number like a ghost at the edge of the room. I stared at it, my thumb hovering over the screen, and for a split second, I felt the old reflex kick in, that desire to fix things, to step into the fire just to keep everyone else from getting burned. But this time, I didn't move. I didn't call back. I didn't text. I didn't even open the missed call details. I just sat there, phone dimming slowly in my hand, the road behind me like a trail of ash, the road ahead still wide and unknowable. The quiet had never felt louder. He wasn't supposed to find me, not out here in this nowhere town where the streets had no names worth remembering and the blinking motel sign looked like it was gasping its final breath. I hadn't told anyone where I was, hadn't left a trail, hadn't posted so much as a gas station selfie. But there he was, Eric, the golden son, the chosen one, the center of every conversation in every kitchen I grew up in, standing outside the thin motel door like a stray dog with wet shoes and a lost look in his eyes. For a second I thought I was imagining it, like some twisted hallucination brought on by too much sleeplessness and the kind of existential drifting that makes everything feel unreal. He knocked twice, soft and unsure, and I didn't move. I stood behind the door in silence, not breathing, just listening to the pathetic rhythm of his knuckles against the peeling paint. Then I heard it, his voice, low and hoarse like he'd been yelling or crying or both. "Dan, I know you're in there, man. Please. Just open the door. I'm not here to fight. I swear." And that's what got me. Not the apology. Not the surprise of him standing there. But the way he said please, like he didn't expect it to work. When I opened the door, I barely recognized him. His face looked thinner, his eyes red like he hadn't slept in days, and his hair, a mess of curls that used to be Mom's pride and joy, hung limp like it had given up trying. He was wearing a hoodie I hadn't seen since high school and a pair of flip-flops, even though the air was cold and dry enough to split skin. He looked like a man who'd been chewed up and spit out, and suddenly, all those polished family stories about his potential and charm and bad luck started to rot in my mind like old fruit. I didn't say anything. I stepped aside and let him in, watching as he walked to the corner of the room like he didn't know how to sit down in a place without asking permission first. You've been gone a while," he said, still not meeting my eyes. I nodded but stayed near the door, leaning against the wall with my arms crossed, waiting for whatever speech he came to deliver. He finally sat on the edge of the motel bed, hunched over with his elbows on his knees like someone who'd just gotten bad news at the doctor's office. "I didn't know it was this bad," he said, voice trembling like a kid caught stealing. "I didn't know you were this close to walking away." And that's when I almost laughed, because of course he didn't know. That was the whole point. No one ever knew because I never made a scene. I never cried or yelled or slammed the door. I just shut down, quietly, slowly, over decades. "You never looked," I said finally, and my voice came out harder than I expected. "That's why you didn't know. You never had to." He flinched like I'd hit him, and for the first time in my life, I didn't feel guilty about it. I felt seen. Not by him, he still didn't really see me, but by myself, finally. He reached into his hoodie pocket and pulled out a crumpled envelope, the kind Mom used to put grocery lists in. "She found your letter," he said. Didn't say anything at first. Just folded it and tucked it into her Bible. Like it was some damn sermon instead of a confession. I took the envelope from him, but didn't open it. I didn't need to. I already knew the words by heart, because they were mine. The question was, why was he bringing it to me? "She didn't even read the whole thing," he added, looking up now, eyes glassy. "She said it was just Daniel being dramatic. Dad asked where you went. She told him not to worry, that you'd come crawling back once you cooled off." He laughed then, short and bitter. "Like you're the one with the history of falling apart." That laugh died fast. He looked at me again, and this time, something cracked open. Not in his voice. Not in the way he hunched his shoulders. But in his eyes, something I'd never seen before. Shame. Not the performative kind, either. The real, stomach-churning, soul-wrecking kind that makes you want to claw your own skin off. "I'm broke," he said. "The cruise? It was a disaster. I missed the boat on day 3 because I got drunk at some bar with a couple I met at the pool. My wallet got stolen. I couldn't even pay the hotel fee when they kicked me off the ship." He wiped his face with the back of his hand. "I had to borrow money from Dad to get back to Florida, and I've been sleeping in my car since I got home. They don't know. They think I'm staying with a friend. And I let them think that because I didn't want to admit I screwed up again." He started crying then, real tears, big and loud and ugly, and I just stood there, hands still in my pockets, heart clenched up in ways I didn't know were still possible. Because as much as I wanted to feel something, sympathy, vindication, maybe even satisfaction, all I felt was tired. Just bone-deep tired. He looked up at me one more time, eyes raw, voice like gravel. "I think Mom knew you left," he said slowly, deliberately. "She just didn't care." Those words hit me harder than any apology ever could. Because they were true. And we both knew it. We sat in that motel room for what felt like hours, though the clock on the wall never moved as fast as our past tried to catch up with us. The air was heavy with everything unspoken, with all the years we'd both spent avoiding this exact moment, pretending like the cracks in our foundation didn't stretch from corner to corner. Eric wiped his face on his sleeve again and looked down at the floor like the answers were hiding in the stained carpet beneath his feet, but I knew there weren't any. Not good ones, anyway. "You always had it figured out," he said after a long silence, his voice hoarse and uneven, like he was stepping into unfamiliar territory. "You had the job, the plans, the discipline. You never needed anything. At least that's what they said." He looked up then, eyes searching mine for something that wouldn't come easy. I used to believe them too, but it wasn't true, was it? I shook my head slowly, not in denial, but in quiet acknowledgement of the lie we'd both lived under. "No," I said, voice low. "It never was. I needed them. I just stopped asking when I realized it didn't make a difference." He leaned forward, elbows on his knees again, hands rubbing together like he was trying to warm up to the truth. "They never told me half the stuff they told you," he said. "I got the soft version. I was the baby, the one they could fix. You were already grown in their eyes, like you stopped needing parents the second I showed up." I let that hang in the air for a moment, let the truth of it seep into the walls, because he wasn't wrong. I did stop needing them, not because I wanted to, but because I learned early that need didn't get me anything but guilt and a pat on the back. Somewhere around the time I hit adolescence, I became self-sustaining, at least in their eyes. The dependable one. The strong one. The one who didn't make noise. But that didn't mean I wasn't breaking. "What do you want me to say?" I asked finally, and my voice cracked in a way I hated, exposing something soft I hadn't meant to show. "That I forgive you? That I get it now? Because I don't. I get that they messed us both up, but that doesn't erase what they gave you that I never got." Eric didn't flinch. He sat up straighter and took a shaky breath. "There's something you don't know," he said, and suddenly he wasn't just broken or apologetic, he looked haunted. "Something they never told you, and I didn't either. But I should have. I didn't say anything. I didn't have to. My silence had always been the invitation people misunderstood as approval. He took it anyway." "Mom used to say you were the insurance policy," he said, eyes locked on mine. "She'd joke about it when she thought I wasn't listening. Said you were the one they knew would always land on his feet, that you were born low maintenance. That's what she called you. Not loving. Not dependable. Low maintenance. Like you were some second-hand car she didn't have to worry about." I felt the blood drain from my face, felt my stomach turn like I'd been punched without warning. That phrase, low maintenance, rattled around my skull like a loose bolt, and suddenly so many things made sense that I wished didn't. "I always thought you had it easier because you didn't get yelled at," Eric continued. "I didn't realize that silence was its own kind of punishment." He looked away then, and I could see the weight of what he'd said settle on his shoulders. But it didn't lift anything off mine. If anything, it added more bricks to a load I was already struggling to carry. "So they decided who we were before we even had a chance," I said, more to myself than him. "You got to be the broken one. I got to be the one who fixed things." Eric nodded, then hesitated like something else was bubbling just under the surface, waiting to erupt. "I knew they were harder on you than they pretended," he said finally. "I didn't always understand it, but I saw it. I saw the way you looked at them sometimes. Like you were waiting for them to see you, and they just didn't." I looked at him then, really looked at him, and for the first time in decades, I didn't see the favorite or the golden boy or the entitled screw-up. I saw a scared kid who grew into a broken man, shaped by the same parents who'd failed both of us in different ways. But that didn't make it fair. And it sure as hell didn't make it forgivable. Then why the hell did you let me hate you all these years? I asked, the words tumbling out sharper than I meant, but truer than I expected. You could have said something. You could have told me they were lying to both of us. But you didn't. You let me sit there, feeling invisible, while you basked in it. Eric didn't respond right away. His mouth opened, then closed again like he was chewing on regret that didn't taste any better going down. Finally, he said, because I liked it. I liked being the favorite. It made me feel like I mattered. And I didn't want to give that up, even if it meant losing you. That was the moment something snapped, not in anger, not in rage, but in that final thread of belief I'd held onto for so long. The belief that, maybe, deep down, we were just misunderstood. That maybe love had been there all along, just badly communicated. But what Eric gave me in that moment wasn't misunderstanding. It was the truth. And truth doesn't heal. It just reveals what's already been broken. The letter came 3 days after Eric left the motel, quietly and without ceremony, leaving behind only an empty coffee cup and a folded receipt with his phone number scrawled across it like we were strangers who met in passing. Not brothers who once shared the same bunk bed and the same broken blueprint for love. I didn't know if he was running again or trying to start over somewhere else, but either way, I didn't ask. I didn't chase. We'd both done enough chasing to last a lifetime, and I was tired of sprinting in circles just to feel like I was getting somewhere. I was halfway across Nevada when I stopped at a diner that looked like it hadn't changed since the 70s, the kind of place where the linoleum floor was permanently sticky and the waitress had a name tag older than most of the customers. I sat at the counter, ordered a coffee I didn't want, and stared out the window at nothing in particular, just sand, sky, and the distant blur of heat waves rising like ghosts off the asphalt. That's where I opened the envelope. It was thick, heavier than it needed to be, with my full name written across the front in the same stiff, neat cursive my mother used when she labeled Tupperware or filled out birthday cards she never actually read aloud. There was no return address, but I didn't need one. I could smell her perfume on the paper, floral and artificial, the kind that lingered too long after she left a room. The letter wasn't an apology. I hadn't expected one, but I think some small, stupid part of me had still hoped. What it was instead was a swirling mess of confusion, defensiveness, and selective memory wrapped in passive-aggressive pleasantries. She started with, "I'm not sure what you're trying to prove," which, frankly, told me everything I needed to know about how little had changed. She listed off the things they'd done for me over the years, how they let me stay in their house after college, how they always invited me to family dinners, how they never charged me rent when I was in between jobs. As if generosity given with strings attached and guilt built in was the same as unconditional love. She mentioned Eric only once, in passing, saying, "You've always been so different from your brother," but never acknowledging how different they had treated us, like that difference was my fault, or a failing on my part to be more like him. And the worst part, the part that sat heavy in my chest like wet concrete, was the line that read, "We never thought you needed anything from us." Like it was some badge of honor they wore proudly, a justification for years of neglect hidden behind the curtain of assumed resilience. That one sentence boiled down everything I had felt since I was old enough to recognize the difference between attention and affection, between presence and participation. The waitress asked if I needed anything else, and I just shook my head, pushing the cup of cold coffee away like it had betrayed me too. Outside, the sky was bleeding into dusk, the horizon swallowing the sun like it didn't care who was watching. I held the letter in my lap, reading it again not for clarity, but for something else, maybe for closure, maybe for the kind of line you could underline and say, "There. That's where she got it." But there was no moment like that. Just page after page of missed points and misplaced priorities, the kind of letter you write not to connect, but to defend your version of the story. The kind of letter that tries to rewrite history with the soft edges of memory and the selective blindness of the comfortable. I thought about going back. I really did. There was a moment, quiet, fleeting, when I pictured myself walking through the front door again, bag in hand, pretending like I'd just been away for a long weekend. I imagined my dad grunting a hello from his recliner, my mom asking if I'd eaten, not because she wanted to feed me, but because it was easier than asking why I'd gone. I imagined Eric, back on the couch, pretending like the motel never happened, like none of it left a mark. And I imagined myself slipping right back into that quiet role I'd mastered so long ago, the dependable son, the background character, the one who never needed anything. But then I imagined something else. I imagined waking up in the middle of the night in that same old house, staring at the same old ceiling, hearing the same silence that never felt like peace. I imagined swallowing the same words I'd been choking on since I was 8 years old. I imagined the weight returning like an old friend, settling back on my chest with all its familiar heaviness. I thought about the diner, about the silence of this nowhere town, about the cracked leather booths and the ticking clock above the register that didn't care where I came from or where I was going. And I realized something. I wasn't free. Not really. Not yet. Because freedom isn't about leaving. It's about letting go. And I wasn't sure I had. I folded the letter slowly, carefully, like it was something fragile and poisonous at the same time. I placed it in my jacket pocket, not because I planned to keep it, but because I couldn't quite bring myself to throw it away. Not yet. Maybe later. Maybe somewhere far from here. The waitress dropped the check on the counter, and I paid in cash, leaving a few extra bills I couldn't afford to miss. I nodded to her, stepped outside into the wind, and stood there for a long minute, listening to the low hum of the desert night. I paid my tab. I started the engine. And I drove. I still don't know if it was toward them or away from everything. Maybe both. Maybe that's all any of us ever do.